S-Cinetone. Is this just another Sony picture profile? Now, as someone that's been shooting on Sony mirrorless cameras for the past couple of years, picture profiles have definitely been an area of experimentation, whether that's the standard or movie gamma, Cine 2, or Cine 4 and the other Cine gammas, HLG, of course log profiles like S-Log 2 and S-Log 3, and so on and so forth. And really, at the end of the day, it comes down to a couple of different looks I'm generally going for. Either number one, I'm trying to sort of maximize dynamic range, and thus I want to shoot in a log profile to be able to capture that, and I'm expecting to do some form of grading in post. However, that still leaves the in-body color argument to keep track of. And really, that's where S-Cinetone comes into play. So first of all, what is S-Cinetone? Well, Sony could describe it better than I could, and I'll leave a link to the white paper in the description below, but basically this is in essence Sony's interpretation of a more ready-to-go version of the Venice camera's color science, right? And one form of describing this could essentially be both S-Log 3 and S-Gamut3 Cine in terms of the gamma and color gamut, with Sony's S709 LUT applied on top of that. However, this is not completely analogous to S-Cinetone, considering that log profile and LUT really is designed to sort of give an early start to the grading process. S-Cinetone is essentially taking some of these same pleasing skin tones, a nice highlight roll-off, and all of the advantages of this gamma curve and combination, and basically adding a little bit more contrast and saturation, and getting it in a more ready-to-go state. Fortunately, Sony stepped up either through their own intuition or just user demand, you could say, and actually included S-Cinetone as of the 2.0 firmware update in the A7S III. So assuming you have one of Sony's newer cinema cameras like the FX3, FX6, FX9, the A1, and of course the A7S III, as I'm showing here in the menus with the 2.0 or newer firmware update, you can now take advantage of S-Cinetone. And yes, that was one of the things I principally wanted to be able to do with this camera. I still do a lot of second shooting and run and gun work, I would say, as the vast majority of videography jobs that I take on. So getting good in-body color and being able to not have to worry too much about grading or tweaking those colors in post is essential for a lot of that stuff. And that's where S-Cinetone comes into play. Now, I've already made a couple of videos demonstrating S-Cinetone and what this looks like, at least as far as my A7S III goes, in terms of functions like weddings, small commercials and product advertisements, modeling and portrait shoots, but I wanted to actually really put S-Cinetone through its paces on different events and get to see what this picture profile was all about. So given my experience with S-Cinetone up to this point, what are my thoughts? So one of the first things I noticed, the Sony A7S III does tend to still skew a bit green in the color department, and I did notice that in shooting S-Cinetone outdoors for this one particular shoot. Now, what I did find in this case was, in a combination with that, of course, S-Cinetone also, out of the box, comes with a -5 detail setting, which is fairly low in terms of adding sharpening to the camera, but still not the overall lowest it would go, and I tend to adjust my details so that it is essentially at the lowest level of sharpening it can be in camera. So after noticing a couple of these things, I decided to make the tweak to essentially make my S-Cinetone footage have a color phase of +2, just to lean things more towards the magenta side in terms of skin tones and the overall image, and bring detail down to -7, again, so that no sharpening was added in camera, and anything that needed to be added in terms of sharpening could be done in post. Now, overall, S-Cinetone really is a pleasing look and profile. I would say one thing I've noticed certainly is the highlight roll-off is excellent. You're getting really something that is incredibly smooth in that upper range when you have a bright sky or any sort of blown out highlight area. And this is actually something I've griped about in terms of other Sony gamma curves and picture profiles, right? Now, as much as I love the movie gamma, it tends to be very rough in the super white areas, i.e. the 100 to 109 IRE area, where you're very likely to get blown out highlights and have some difficulty recovering that if you're shooting in that. This is what ultimately kind of leaned me into the Cine 4 route for a lot of in-body color things in the past. Having S-Cinetone be a gamma curve that also handles highlights very well is something that I've really enjoyed using in it. Now, in terms of actually exposing for S-Cinetone, this is arguably one of the simpler picture profiles, I would say, to expose in general, and pretty much demonstrates a what you see is what you get type of workflow. Just as a few simple points of reference, your multimeter set to multi-mode and showing a value of 0, and or just your histogram looking balanced are a couple of decent ways to monitor exposure. Now, if you're using zebras in camera and setting something like a lower limit, you would want to set that C2 or similar zebra value to 109, since 109 is the clipping point of S-Cinetone. I would be iffy about trying to set anything further in terms of exposing for middle gray and skin tones. Again, this is going to be a profile that pretty much what you see on screen is what you're going to get as the end product. Though it is worth noting that if you do underexpose, you're likely to get a more contrasty image with some deeper and richer tones. If you do lean more towards overexposing, you are prone to get a lighter image with a bit less contrast. And this may ultimately have an impact on the image, of course, but this could also be a look that you're intending to go for. Now, I already made a video that you should check out regarding the dual ISOs in the Sony a7S III and the FX3. The summary of that is, for S-Cinetone, these values are 100 and 2000 in order to minimize noise and get the cleanest image you can. But really, depending on what camera you're using in the Sony system, these values are going to vary. So there is not one set number you can rely on for this across Sony's cameras for S-Cinetone. Now, one other interesting thing with S-Cinetone is the fact that this actually matches and pairs pretty well with other both log profiles I've noticed, and even just kind of in-body color options that are out there for Sony. Now, Paul Ream, or Extra Shot, has actually done a fair amount of work in this space. His sort of Cine 4 and Pro gamma and color gamut-based picture profile for matching S-Cinetone in the a7 III is something that looks really good and works well, and it's something that I've been using in my a7 III when I've wanted to match the S-Cinetone look in the a7S III. Now, another interesting thought with S-Cinetone might be taking that same S-Cinetone-based gamma curve and pairing it actually with some different color gamut options that exist in the camera. I haven't really experimented with this too much, but I've been certainly curious to see if something like Sony Standard or Movie Color actually pairs well with an S-Cinetone based gamma curve, given the better highlights and the areas in the super whites. There's of course a bunch of other combinations that could be had with this, but something to definitely consider too in the realm of exploring all that's possible with S-Cinetone in the camera. The other thing I'll say is that the log gamma curves like S-Log3 and S-Gamut3 Cine, depending on how you grade that and or what LUTs you might use, can also match exceptionally well with S-Cinetone. The fact that you're now getting 10-bit 422 color out of these Sony mirrorless cameras like the a7S III and the A1 and hopefully future models, and compare this with a nice gamma curve and color matrix like S-Cinetone, essentially means that you have nearly limitless abilities to push and pull color, and really having that enhanced color bit depth and chroma subsampling is one of those things that you don't realize how important it is until you actually need it. So with all that said, what are my thoughts on S-Cinetone? Is it the perfect Sony picture profile? I don't know that I would use that word necessarily, but for in-body color in Sony cameras, it is now my go-to, and probably will be for the foreseeable future. And for what it's worth, I'm actually also filming with S-Cinetone right now, maybe with a slight grade on top of it. Now, I would also say, again, that doesn't mean I'm not going to shoot things in S-Log3 and S-Gamut3.Cine. I certainly will use that for different projects. I will certainly also even use potentially other color gammas depending on the look I'm going for. But it has proven its worth as being something that is more than adequate in terms of being able to deliver fast, quick content, and in many cases, as promised, does not even require any grading in post. Maybe just as one more final note, I think S-Cinetone and really the color science of the a7S III and now the A1 sort of mark a unique point in the camera wars and color debate. The idea that necessarily Sony has particularly bad colors or that you can't get a certain look with the Sony camera, I think is a moot point really at this juncture. We've really reached a point where kind of camera colors and sort of the preference for an image is less so based on any technical difference or malformation in how the camera is designed, and really is just a matter of personal preference. The a7S III is really one of those cameras that sort of, I think, highlight that and kind of started Sony being in sort of a new era of color for their cameras, and I would say, certainly if you've ever been concerned in the past about that, that is something to not even worry about going forward. And so that is my take on S-Cinetone. Hopefully this video has been of some help to you. Feel free to leave a like and subscribe if it has. I'm definitely going to do more content around Sony mirrorless cameras and some tips and tricks and my thoughts around them. And if you'd be interested in me doing maybe more content around Sony's picture profiles and sort of gamma curves and things like that, feel free to leave a comment below. That is all I have to say. So thanks for watching.